My wife cheated on me with her coworker while pretending it was work. I followed them and caught her, but I never imagined I'd be sitting here, typing out a story like this for the world to see. My name's Daniel, and I'm just a regular guy in his late 30s. I work in IT, and my wife, Emma, is a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm. We've been married for 12 years, with 2 amazing kids, Sam 10 and Lily 7. From the outside, we're a picture-perfect family. But things started feeling off about 6 months ago. It was subtle at first. Emma would come home a bit later than usual, blaming it on client meetings and overtime. I didn't think much of it. I trusted her completely. But then, I noticed she had this spark in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. She'd be texting late at night, smiling at her phone. When I asked her about it, she'd wave it off, saying it was just her friends from work sharing memes. We had always been open with each other, but suddenly she started being more secretive with her phone. She put a passcode on it, claiming it was for work confidentiality. Our conversations, which once flowed naturally, became strained, almost forced. It felt like she was always somewhere else mentally, even when we were sitting on the couch together watching TV. I tried not to overthink it. After all, she was a hard-working professional, and we had a busy household to run. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, one Friday evening, she casually dropped a bombshell. "Hey Dan, I've been invited to a weekend retreat by my company. It's mandatory for all senior managers. We'll be brainstorming strategies for the next quarter." I nodded slowly. "When is it?" "This weekend," she said, her eyes flitting away from mine. "I know it's short notice, but I really need to be there." She tried to sell it convincingly, mentioning how important it was for her career and how all the senior staff would be there. But something in her tone was off. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I kept my suspicions to myself. "All right," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll manage the kids this weekend. Don't worry about a thing." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. That was the first time I felt the coldness of suspicion creeping into our relationship. I had no idea then just how deep it would run. After Emma left for her work retreat, I tried to distract myself by keeping busy with the kids. We had pizza, watched a movie, and I tucked them in early. But the house felt emptier than usual. My mind kept drifting back to Emma's sudden trip. It didn't sit right with me. Later that night, I got a message from my friend Mark. I told him about Emma's trip and how something felt off. His response made me pause. "Man, if it's bugging you, why don't you check where she's staying? You'll know for sure." Reluctantly, I decided to follow his advice. Emma had asked me to install a hotel app on her laptop for a different trip a while back. Out of curiosity, and maybe desperation, I logged in. There it was, a reservation for a suite at Maple Hill Lodge, but it wasn't booked under her name. It was under Michael Anderson. That name sounded familiar. He was a coworker she'd mentioned in passing, a friend, she said. I stared at the booking details, feeling the ground shift beneath me. Why would Emma be staying at a lodge with him? Heart pounding, I called Mark and explained everything. "Man, that's not good," he said, his voice tense. "If you want to know the truth, drive up there. See it for yourself." My hands were shaking as I grabbed my car keys. Mark agreed to watch the kids, and an hour later, I was driving through the night toward the lodge, dreading what I might find. When I finally got there, I parked far from the entrance, not wanting to be seen. I walked quietly up to the lobby. I asked the receptionist if Emma had checked in. She hadn't, but when I mentioned Michael's name, the receptionist nodded. "They're in a suite on the 3rd floor." That confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood outside the lodge, staring at the building, feeling my world crumble. Then I saw them, Emma and Michael, walking out, holding hands and laughing like a couple. It wasn't a work retreat. I knew that now. But I needed to know more. I couldn't just confront them yet. I had to see where this was going. I watched as Emma and Michael walked back into the lodge, hand in hand. They looked so at ease with each other, like a couple that had been together for years. My stomach turned. Instead of rushing in and making a scene, I decided to keep following them from a distance. They took the elevator up, so I used the stairs. I reached the 3rd floor just in time to see them disappear into a suite at the end of the hall. I stopped a few doors away, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. What was I doing here? Was I really ready to hear, or see, what was happening inside? I forced myself to get closer and listen through the thin walls. I could make out their voices, talking softly, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. Then, there was silence, followed by sounds that made my blood run cold. Laughter, whispers, and then, unmistakable noises that confirmed my worst fears. I stepped back, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. There was no room for doubt anymore. Emma wasn't just on a work trip. She was in that room, cheating on me. My first instinct was to kick down the door, to confront them both, to let my rage loose. But something held me back. If I stormed in, it would only lead to chaos, and she'd probably just deny everything, twist the story somehow. I needed a plan. I stumbled back down the stairs and out to the parking lot. I sat in my car, staring blankly at the dashboard. Everything felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My phone buzzed in my pocket, messages from Mark, asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. Whatever happened, I knew one thing: I couldn't go back to how things were. Emma had crossed a line that couldn't be erased, and now I had to decide how to confront the reality of what our marriage had become. I sat in my car outside the lodge, staring at the steering wheel as if it held the answers to all my questions. I felt numb, unable to process what I'd just witnessed. Emma, the woman I'd built a life with, was in that room betraying me. It wasn't just some mistake. She was fully aware of what she was doing. My phone buzzed again. It was Mark. Mark, are you there? Did you see anything? I hesitated, then typed a reply with trembling fingers. Me, yeah, I saw them. She's with him in their room. Mark called immediately. Dan, you've got to get out of there. Don't do anything rash, okay? I know you're hurting, but let's think this through. His voice grounded me a little. I took a deep breath and nodded, even though he couldn't see me. You're right. I'm not going to confront them. Not yet. But what do I do now? Get proof, he said firmly. If you decide to confront her, you'll want solid evidence. Take pictures, record what you can. Then leave. You don't want to make a scene in front of a bunch of strangers. Proof. It was cold, calculated advice, but it made sense. I needed more than just my word against hers. I grabbed my phone and, with a deep breath, walked back into the lodge. I lingered by the hallway leading to their suite, making sure I wouldn't be noticed. It was quiet. I opened my phone camera and zoomed in, taking a picture of their door number. I felt sick doing this, but I pushed through. Then I heard their voices again, muffled through the wall. Emma's laughter. Michael's low murmur. And then something I'll never forget. Emma saying, "I'm glad we finally have some time alone. Dan is completely clueless." That hit me harder than anything else. All this time, she'd thought of me as some oblivious fool. Someone who wouldn't notice her slipping away. My chest tightened, a mix of anger and humiliation boiling inside me. But I forced myself to stay still, to keep recording, letting her words sink in. After a few more minutes, I stepped away. I had what I needed, but that didn't make it any easier. I returned to my car, staring at the photos and videos on my phone. Proof that my wife wasn't who I thought she was. Mark called again. "Den, wat now?" I swallowed hard, my voice shaking as I answered. "I'm going home. I can't be here any longer." "Good. Head home, be with your kids, and we'll figure out the next steps together." Driving back felt surreal, like I was in a daze. My thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of what to do next. Confront her? Tell her I knew? Or just leave everything behind and start over? By the time I got home, I still didn't have any answers. I quietly entered the house, careful not to wake the kids. Mark was there, sitting on the couch, waiting for me. He stood up as soon as he saw me, concern etched across his face. "You okay?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No. But I will be." He nodded. "We'll get through this, man. Whatever you decide, I've got your back." I glanced at my phone again, at the damning evidence I'd gathered. Whatever I chose to do, I knew my life would never be the same. Emma came home that afternoon, smiling like everything was normal. She hugged the kids and kissed me on the cheek. My hands shook as I forced a smile back. "The retreat was great," she said casually. "Exhausting but good for work." I just nodded, my heart pounding. "We need to talk, Emma. Now." She looked confused but followed me upstairs. I sat on the bed, holding my phone. Without a word, I showed her the photos and recordings I took at the lodge. Her face went pale. "Den I." "Don't lie," I interrupted, my voice low. "I know you were with Michael. I followed you." She stared at me, then at the photos, her eyes widening. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "How long?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. 3 months, she said softly, looking away. My heart shattered at her confession. I wanted to scream, to break something, but instead I just stood up, shaking my head. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me with tears in her eyes.
I don't know, Dan. I was lost.
But I never wanted it to end like this. I took a deep breath, holding back my emotions. Well, it has. Now you have to decide what comes next, Emma. Emma sat there, staring at the floor, as if the weight of what she'd done was finally hitting her. I could see her struggling to find words, but I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I don't want this to be the end, Dan, she whispered. I love you, and I love our family. I made a mistake, but we can work through this, can't we? I clenched my fists, fighting to keep calm. You say you love me, but you've been sneaking around for months. You lied to my face, over and over. Why should I believe anything you say now? Tears streamed down her cheeks.
I just got lost.
I never wanted to leave you. It was stupid, and I know I don't deserve another chance, but please. Think about the kids, our life. We can get through this if we try. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I almost wanted to believe her. But then I remembered the look on her face when she was with Michael, laughing and carefree, so different from the Emma sitting before me now. I need time, I said quietly, standing up. Time to figure out what I want. I can't just move past this like it's nothing. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Take as much time as you need. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this.
I promise.
Without another word, I walked out of the bedroom and went downstairs. I couldn't look at her right now. Everything felt too raw, too painful. I sat alone in the living room, staring blankly at the wall, wondering how our life had spiraled out of control so quickly. Could I really forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? Or was this the end of everything we'd built together? For now, I had no answers. Just a whirlwind of emotions and a house that no longer felt like home. For the next few days, Emma and I barely spoke. She stayed out of my way, giving me space, while I tried to figure out what to do. The kids didn't seem to notice the tension between us, thankfully. I kept up appearances, going through the motions of everyday life, but inside, I felt like a stranger in my own home. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Emma approached me hesitantly.
Dan, can we talk?
Just for a few minutes. I looked at her, feeling exhausted but knowing we couldn't avoid it forever. Okay, I said quietly, sitting down at the kitchen table. She took a seat across from me, her face pale and anxious.
I know you're hurt.
And I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but what are you thinking? Do you want me to leave? Her voice was small, almost afraid. The question hung in the air, and I struggled to answer. Part of me wanted to yell, to tell her to pack up and go. But then I thought about the kids and what that would mean for them. This wasn't just about us. I don't know, Emma, I admitted, my voice strained. I don't know what I want right now. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the table. I've been looking into therapy, she murmured. For us or for me alone, whatever you think is best. I'm willing to do anything. I know it doesn't fix what I did, but I'm trying to find a way forward. Therapy. The idea lingered in my mind. Maybe it was a way to sort through the mess of emotions, if not to save our marriage, then at least to understand how it all fell apart. I'll think about it, I said finally. She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes.
Thank you, then.
I'll give you all the time you need. With that, she stood up and quietly left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Therapy might help us sort things out, but was there really any way to rebuild what she destroyed? I stared at the empty kitchen, feeling overwhelmed. I didn't have the answers yet, but agreeing to talk was a small step. Whether it was a step toward reconciliation or goodbye, I still wasn't sure. The next day, I decided to call the therapist Emma had suggested. It felt surreal to set up a session, like admitting that our marriage was really at its breaking point. But I knew I had to do it, if not for us, then for myself. Our first session was awkward and tense. We sat in Dr. Kelly's office, surrounded by calming decor that didn't match the turmoil I felt inside. Emma looked down the entire time, while I struggled to keep my emotions in check. What brings you two here today? Dr. Kelly asked gently. I didn't hold back. I found out Emma's been having an affair. Emma flinched but stayed quiet. Dr. Kelly nodded, giving us both a moment. Emma, what do you hope to gain from these sessions? Emma took a deep breath. I want to understand why I did it. I want to fix what I broke, if that's even possible. The session was filled with raw emotions, my anger, Emma's guilt. But it was a start. Dr. Kelly asked us to do small exercises at home, like talking for 5 minutes each day about anything but the affair. Over the next few weeks, we slowly made progress. There were still fights and tense moments, but also brief glimpses of understanding. One evening after a particularly tough session, Emma looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for not giving up, Dan. I know it's hard." I sighed, feeling the weight of it all. "I'm not doing this for you, Emma. I'm doing it to see if there's anything left worth saving." She nodded, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the woman I fell in love with so long ago. Maybe we weren't completely lost, at least, not yet. The therapy sessions became part of our weekly routine. Each time we walked into Dr. Kelly's office, it felt like we were peeling back another layer of the hurt and betrayal. Some days, we left more broken than before, but other days, we left with a small flicker of hope. One evening, about a month into therapy, something changed. Emma and I were sitting in the living room, just the two of us. The kids were asleep, and the house was quiet. She looked over at me, hesitating before she spoke. "I know I have no right to ask, but do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" she asked softly. The question hung in the air, heavy and raw. I wanted to tell her no, to say that what she did was unforgivable. But that wasn't entirely true. Even if I couldn't say the words yet, I realized I hadn't left. I hadn't given up entirely.
"I don't know," I admitted honestly. "But I'm here, aren't I?"
"We're still trying, and that means something." She nodded, a small smile forming on her lips.
"Yeah, it does."
After that, things began to shift. We started talking more, not just about the affair, but about the small, everyday things that we'd once shared so easily. Slowly, I felt the walls between us start to lower, just a bit. One night, after a particularly good day, Emma reached out and held my hand. The simple gesture surprised me. I looked at her, expecting to feel anger or sadness. But instead, I just felt something familiar. Not forgiveness, not love, but the faintest trace of what we used to have. "Thank you, Dan," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "For giving this a chance." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't ready to say more than I felt. But I didn't pull away either. And for now, that small step was enough. Weeks passed, and the tension that once filled our home began to slowly dissipate. We weren't anywhere near normal, far from it, but there were small signs of life returning to our relationship. Little moments that I would have missed if I hadn't been paying attention. One Friday evening, after a long week of work and therapy sessions, Emma suggested something unexpected. "Why don't we have a family game night?" she asked hesitantly. "Like we used to. Just us and the kids."
I hesitated.
It seemed so ordinary considering everything. But I knew the kids needed to feel some semblance of normalcy. And maybe, just maybe, it could remind us of what we were fighting for.
"Okay," I agreed.
"Let's do it." That night, we gathered in the living room with snacks and board games. Sam and Lily were thrilled, laughing and arguing over who got to go first. For the first time in a long while, I felt myself relax, even smile. Emma joined in, her laughter soft and genuine. It wasn't forced, and neither was mine. As the kids went to bed later, exhausted but happy, Emma turned to me.
"Tonight was nice," she said quietly. "It felt good."
I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It had felt good. Not perfect, not completely free of awkwardness, but it was a step in the right direction. Something we both needed. From that night on, we tried to bring back more small traditions, making breakfast together on Sundays, watching a movie with the kids on Friday nights. These little acts didn't erase what happened, but they reminded us of why we were still here, trying to put the broken pieces back together. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Emma and I found ourselves sitting on the porch, just talking. There was a quietness between us that felt comfortable, not strained. I turned to her, searching for the right words.
"Emma."
"I don't know if I'll ever fully get past what happened," I said softly. "But I can see that you're trying. I don't know where we'll end up, but I'm willing to keep trying too." She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes.
"That's more than I could have hoped for, Dan. Thank you."
We sat there in silence, side by side, staring out into the night. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something new from the ruins of what we once had. As the days turned into weeks, Emma and I found ourselves settling into a new rhythm. We talked more openly, even when the conversations were uncomfortable. She shared her struggles, her regrets, and I started to share my own feelings, the hurt, the anger, and the uncertainty about our future. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Emma brought out a notebook. She looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she set it on the table between us.
"What's this?"
I asked, eyeing it curiously.
"It's kind of a journal," she said softly.
"I've been writing in it since we started therapy. Trying to sort through everything, understand what led me down that path. I know you might not want to read it, but I thought, maybe it would help you see where my head was. I stared at the notebook, unsure of how to respond. Part of me didn't want to look at it, afraid of finding more pain inside its pages. But another part of me knew that if we were really going to move forward, I needed to understand. Okay, I said quietly, picking it up.
I'll read it.
Her eyes widened, a mixture of relief and fear crossing her face.
Take your time with it, Dan.
There's no rush. I just want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to be honest with you. I nodded and set the notebook aside for later, feeling a strange sense of anticipation mixed with dread. After Emma went upstairs, I opened it, flipping through the first few pages. Her handwriting was neat, each word carefully chosen. The entries detailed her confusion, her feelings of loneliness, and how she'd let herself become involved with Michael. It wasn't easy to read. But I saw something in those pages. Raw honesty, remorse, and a desire to understand herself. It didn't justify what she'd done, but it helped me see that she was truly trying to change. When I finally looked up from the notebook, hours had passed. I felt drained, yet oddly lighter. I didn't know if I could forgive her, but I realized that part of me wanted to. The next morning, I found Emma in the kitchen, making coffee. I placed the notebook gently on the counter beside her. I read some of it, I said quietly. I can see you're trying, and I appreciate that. She looked at me, surprise and hope flickering in her eyes.
Thank you, Dan.
I just want to be honest with you, about everything. No more secrets. I nodded slowly. No more secrets. That's a start. It was just a few words, but I could see the impact they had on her. For the first time since the affair came to light, I saw genuine hope in her eyes. It wasn't a promise that everything would be okay, but it was a small step toward rebuilding the trust we'd lost. As we stood there, sipping coffee in silence, I realized something. Maybe we'd never go back to the way we were before. But we could try to build something different, something new. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. A few weeks later, as Emma and I sat on the couch after putting the kids to bed, she glanced at me nervously. Dan, there's something I need to tell you, she said softly.
My chest tightened.
What is it? I ended things with Michael right after you confronted me, but he's been trying to reach out. I blocked his number, but he's sent a few emails. I didn't respond, but I should have told you sooner. I swallowed hard, feeling anger and anxiety mix. Why didn't you say anything? I was afraid it would ruin the progress we've made, she admitted, looking down. But I want to be completely honest now. I'll show you the emails if you want. I took a deep breath, trying to push back the bitterness. No, I don't need to see them. Just promise to tell me right away if anything like this happens again.
She nodded quickly. I promise, Dan.
We sat in silence, the weight of her words lingering between us. It wasn't easy, but I could see she was trying to rebuild what she'd broken. For now, that would have to be enough. After that night, things shifted between us again. Emma was true to her word. She told me about everything, no matter how small. If she got a random message from an old friend or a work email that made her uncomfortable, she let me know right away. It was as if she was determined to rebuild the trust she had shattered, piece by piece. One evening, we were sitting at the dining table, going through some old family photos. Lily had a school project, and Emma suggested using pictures from when they were younger. As we sorted through the albums, I found myself smiling at memories I hadn't thought about in a long time. Remember this? I asked, holding up a photo of us at the beach, the kids building sandcastles at our feet. Emma looked at it and laughed softly. Yeah, I remember. That was such a perfect day. It feels like it was a lifetime ago. It does, I agreed quietly.
But we were happy then.
She glanced up at me, her eyes searching mine. Do you think we could get there again? The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, but then nodded slowly. Maybe not the same as before, but maybe we can find something new.
Her face softened, a tentative smile forming.
I'd like that. It was a small moment, but one that felt significant. We continued sorting through the photos, sharing stories and laughing about the kids' antics. For a little while, it felt like we were two people who knew each other again, not just strangers living under the same roof. Later that night, as we put the albums away, Emma turned to me.
Dan,
I know I can't erase what I did, but I'm grateful for every day we get to work on this. I took a deep breath, looking at her.
Me too.
It's not easy, but I'm glad we're still trying. It wasn't a resolution, but it felt like a step forward, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build something new together. The days blurred into weeks, and little by little, Emma and I found ourselves reconnecting in ways I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't just about therapy sessions anymore or awkward conversations about the past. It was about rediscovering the small things that had once made us feel close. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and pancakes. I walked into the kitchen to find Emma flipping pancakes on the griddle, humming softly. The kids were still asleep, and the house was calm. "I thought we could have breakfast together," she said, glancing over her shoulder with a tentative smile.
Just us. I hesitated, then nodded. Sure, that sounds nice.
We sat at the table, the silence between us no longer tense but comfortable. I took a bite of the pancakes and glanced at her. "These taste just like the ones we used to make on Sundays, back when we first got married." She smiled, a hint of nostalgia in her eyes.
I know.
I remembered how much you liked them. We ate slowly, sharing memories from those early days, how we'd spend lazy weekends cooking together, planning small trips, and just enjoying each other's company. It felt good to talk about something other than the pain and betrayal. For the first time in months, I saw the person I'd fallen in love with so many years ago. After breakfast, we ended up sitting on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the world wake up. The air was crisp, and the morning sun bathed everything in a soft golden light. "Dan," Emma said quietly, breaking the silence.
I know it's still hard.
"I know we have a long way to go, but I'm so grateful you're still here, willing to even have moments like these." I turned to her, studying her face, the hope mixed with uncertainty. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm here because I want to be. It's not easy, but I think there's still something worth fighting for." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded, squeezing my hand back. "So do I." We sat there, hand in hand, watching the sunrise. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was real, and it felt like another step forward. Another sign that slowly, we were finding our way back to each other. Months passed, and Emma and I continued to rebuild, one small step at a time. It wasn't smooth or easy, there were setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when I questioned everything. But through it all, we kept pushing forward. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Emma approached me with a familiar nervousness. She held something behind her back, her gaze steady but cautious. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about everything we've gone through. I know we're not the same people we were when we started, and I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back." I nodded, unsure of where she was going with this.
Go on.
She took a deep breath and revealed what she'd been hiding, a small wrapped gift box. "This is for you. It's not much, but it's something that helped me realize what I truly want." I opened the box and found a keychain inside. It was simple, a small silver ring with a tiny engraved plate that read, "New Beginnings." "I ordered it a while ago," she continued. "It's a reminder to myself that we're not trying to go back to what we had. We're trying to build something new, something better. I want us to move forward, not look back." I stared at the keychain, the weight of her words sinking in.
She was right.
We couldn't go back to who we used to be.
Too much had happened.
But maybe we could build a future that looked different from our past, one that was shaped by all we had endured and learned. "Thank you," I murmured, looking up at her. "It's perfect." We stood there in silence for a moment, the gift in my hand feeling like a promise, a small token of hope. Then I reached out and pulled her into a gentle embrace. It felt different than before, but there was something strong in that hug. Something real. "I don't know where we'll end up," I whispered, my voice steady. "But I'm willing to keep trying, to see what we can build together." She held me tighter, a tear sliding down her cheek as she nodded against my shoulder.
Me too, Dan.
"Whatever it takes, I'm here." That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, we fell asleep holding hands. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. We weren't the same people we once were, but we were finding our way forward, together. It wasn't the end of our story, but rather, the start of a new chapter. One where we faced the unknown hand in hand, ready to build something stronger from the pieces of our broken past.